My father raised his glass in a packed living room and said, "Finally, some peace in my house." The whole family laughed laughing because I was the one being thrown out that night with 2 weeks' notice so my brother could have my room. I stood by the door with one bag and my grandmother's sealed envelope in my coat, the one she'd made me swear to keep, and I said nothing. The air smelled like grilled meat and somebody's perfume. Balloons, catered trays, a party, thrown to celebrate getting rid of me. If you've ever held a family together with your own 2 hands, only to be treated like the thing they were relieved to throw away, stay with me. This one is for you. He didn't lower his voice when he saw me. He raised it. "Don't worry, everybody. She's not staying long." More laughter. My aunt's hand flew to her mouth. My brother's fiancée was already measuring my room with her eyes. My face went hot. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I gripped that envelope until the paper bit into my palm, picked up my bag, and walked out into the cold while my own father toasted my absence. He didn't know I'd been the one paying for that house for 6 years. Let me tell you who I was in that family, because it explains everything that happened after. I'm 29. I'm an accountant. I'm the kind of person who reads the fine print, who keeps receipts, who notices when a number doesn't add up. In my family, that made me invisible. I was the one nobody worried about, because I never asked for anything and I never made noise. My brother, Daniel, was the opposite. 2 years older, loud, charming, always one big idea away from being rich. When Daniel wrecked a car, it was a funny story he told at dinner. When Daniel dropped out of his second program, my father called it finding himself. When I earned a scholarship, my father said it was nice the school felt sorry for me. That was the rhythm of my whole life. Daniel was the future. I was the furniture. My father ran our family the way some men run a business that's quietly going under. He talked louder than everyone. He controlled the money. He made sure that approval only flowed one direction, down from him, and that you had to earn it again every single day. He decided who in the family was a success and who was a disappointment. He decided early that I was the second kind, and he never updated the file. There was one thing he said more than anything else. He said it at the dinner table. He said it at holidays. He said it that night at the party, with a glass in his hand. "What have you ever owned?" "Nothing. You don't own a single thing." He meant it as a knife. I need you to hold on to that sentence. We are going to come back to it, and when we do, it's going to cut the other way. There was only one person in that house who looked at me like I mattered. My grandmother, my father's own mother. She was sharp right up to the end. Sharper than him, and he knew it, and it bothered him. She used to watch the way he handled money, the way he handled people, and she'd get this look on her face. A quiet, careful look. The look of a woman deciding not to say what she was really thinking. One afternoon, near the end, she took my hand. Her grip was stronger than it had any right to be. "Your grandmother trusted you," she said. "Remember that." She talked about herself like that sometimes, in the third person, like she was already leaving instructions for after she was gone. Then she gave me an envelope, sealed, heavier than paper should be. On the front, in her own handwriting, it said, "Only open this if they ever come for the house." I asked her what was inside. She just folded my fingers over it and shook her head. She made me promise not to open it unless they came for the house. I didn't understand it then. I tucked it away and I tried very hard not to think about why a woman would say a thing like that about her own son. There are only 2 things you need to know about my father's past. Just 2. But they're the 2 that matter, because everything that came later was built on them. The first is that he almost lost everything once. Years ago, some deal that wasn't really a deal, the kind of thing he never talks about. I know it happened because my grandmother quietly cleaned it up. She covered the loss. She saved him. And I think that was the moment she stopped trusting him with anything he could destroy. She never said so out loud. She didn't have to. I saw it in that careful look every time money came up at the table. The second thing is closer to me, and it's the one that still makes my chest tight. For the last 6 years, I had been the one paying for that house. The property tax, twice a year. The repairs, the roof when it leaked in the spring. The furnace when it died in the middle of January and my father said, "I'll deal with it," and then didn't. I paid all of it. Quietly, automatically. out of my own account, because I loved that house, and I loved her, and somebody had to. Nobody ever asked where the money came from. My father just assumed the house took care of itself, the way he assumed everything good in his life was free, paid for by people he never bothered to thank. But my grandmother knew. She was the only one who knew. And once, when I tried to bring it up at dinner, she caught my eye across the table and gave the smallest shake of her head. Later, in the kitchen, she told me why. Don't tell them, she said. Let them think it's free. I didn't understand that one either. Not then. It sounded like pride, or maybe stubbornness. It would be years before I realized it was strategy. So that was me. The quiet daughter who owned nothing, paying for a house she'd never been thanked for, holding a sealed envelope she'd promised not to open. Two patterns I'd watched my entire life. A man who took, and a woman who quietly protected what he might destroy. Soon, they were going to lock together into a trap. I just couldn't see the shape of it yet. It started with a text I was never supposed to see. My cousin Maya forwarded it to me one Tuesday night. It came from my father, sent to the extended family group chat, the one I wasn't in. It read, "Saturday party finally getting the deadweight out. Bring something to grill." The deadweight. That was me. I read it 3 times. The word didn't even sting at first. It just sat there on the screen, casual, the way you'd describe a couch you were finally hauling to the curb. Then I set my phone face down on the counter, because I couldn't look at it anymore. He hadn't told me yet. He'd told the whole family first, turned it into a barbecue, made it a thing people were bringing potato salad to. By the time I found out, refusing to leave would make me the difficult one. That was the design. I could see it the way I see a balanced ledger. Clean, deliberate, cold. He called me that same night. No warning, no softening. "You've got 2 weeks," he said. "Then this room is your brother's. Daniel and Ashley are moving in. They need the space more than you do." I asked him where I was supposed to go. "That's not my problem," he said. "You're 29. Figure it out. God knows you've had it easy here long enough." Easy. I want you to sit with that word the way I had to. I sat on the edge of my bed holding the phone to my ear, looking around at the room he was giving away, and I thought about every property tax bill I'd paid for the walls he was standing inside. I'd carried that house on my back for 6 years, and the man who never paid a cent toward it called my life there easy. Something in my chest went very still. Not loud. Still. The way water goes right before it turns to ice. I almost told him. The truth was right there in my mouth that I'd been the one paying for everything, that he had no idea what he was talking about. My grandmother's voice stopped me. "Let them think it's free." So I swallowed it, and I heard myself say, "Okay, Dad." Calm, agreeable, the good little disappointment. He hung up first. He always hung up first. I sat there in the dark listening to the dial tone, feeling the silence of a house that wasn't even his fill up the line. He'd announced it to the whole family before he ever said a word to me. Fine. Then the whole family could watch how it ended, too. I told myself I wouldn't go to the party. I'm an accountant, I don't walk into rooms where the numbers are already against me. But some stubborn, stupid part of me, the part that was still somebody's daughter, thought maybe if he saw my face he'd remember I was his kid. Maybe 29 years counted for something. They didn't. He was holding court by the grill when I came through the gate. Beer in one hand, tongs in the other, smoke curling up behind him. An audience of relatives circled around like he was telling the best joke of the night. The yard smelled like charcoal and cut grass. Somewhere, a speaker was playing something cheerful. He saw me, and instead of lowering his voice, he lifted it so the whole yard could hear. "There she is. Don't worry, everybody, she's not staying long." The laughter came easy, comfortable. They'd laughed at me like this my whole life, and the sound of it landed in the exact same place it always had, somewhere just under the ribs. My aunt's hand went up over her mouth. Ashley, my brother's fiancée, had her phone out, filming, grinning, capturing the whole little roast for the memories. "Smile for the camera, sweetheart," my father said. "You're finally useful for a photo. And here's the part I'm not proud of." For 1 second, I almost apologized to him. To him, my mouth started shaping the words, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'll be gone soon," like I was the one who'd done something wrong. Like I owed this room an apology for taking up space in it. I felt my face go hot. My eyes stung, and I hated that they stung, because I could feel everyone watching to see if I'd cry. I stood in the middle of that yard with 30 people laughing and felt about 9 years old, small enough to disappear. And then I stopped. I closed my mouth. I made myself breathe in through my nose, slow, the way you do before a hard meeting when your hands want to shake and you won't let them. And one clear thought cut through all of it. Not this time. Not anymore. I didn't give a speech. I didn't beg anyone to see me. I didn't even raise my voice. I reached into my bag, and my fingers found the corner of my grandmother's envelope, still sealed, exactly where I'd kept it. The paper was soft from being carried so long, worn at the edges where my thumb always landed. It steadied me more than anything anyone in that yard could have said. I looked at my father one last time. I looked at the people laughing with him. Then I picked up my bag. I didn't argue. I just took the envelope, and I left. Nobody followed me out. Why would they? As far as that whole family knew, the problem had just solved itself. The deadweight was leaving. The party could go on without me. I sat in my car in the driveway for a moment before I started the engine. The laughter was still going on behind me, muffled now through the glass. My hands weren't shaking anymore. That surprised me. I'd expected to fall apart somewhere around the second beer joke. Instead, I felt something colder and clearer settle into place, like a long column of figures finally adding up to a number nobody else had bothered to total. For 6 years, I'd been the quiet one, the one who paid and never said so, the one who let them think the house ran itself. I'd been silent so long they'd forgotten silence isn't the same as having nothing to say. They thought this was the end of my story in that house. It was the first night of theirs ending. I drove straight to the small apartment I'd quietly rented 2 weeks earlier. That's the part nobody knew. I'm an accountant. We don't wait for the deadline. The day he first hinted Daniel might need more space, I'd signed a lease somewhere else and said nothing. So while my father thought he was throwing me out into the cold, I already had a door of my own to close behind me. I closed it, and then I did the one thing I'm better at than anyone in my family. I opened my records. 6 years of bank statements. I lined them up on the kitchen table by date, oldest to newest, the way I'd line up evidence for an audit. And there it was, in plain black numbers. Every property tax payment on that house, paid from my account, every repair, the roofer, the furnace company, the plumber I'd called at midnight in January, the county tax office, twice a year, like clockwork, 6 years running. Every single line had my name on it, not his. I scrolled back through years of it, payment after payment, season after season. The spring, the gutters went. The winter, the pipes nearly froze. Birthdays I'd skipped to cover a tax bill nobody thanked me for. It was all there, 6 years of my quiet life laid out in rows, and not one entry that said his name anywhere. Let me make this simple, the way I'd explain it to a client across my desk. The record is my bank statements. The key detail is the payee, the county tax assessor, the same parcel number. Year after year, every payment drawn from an account in my name and no one else's. And what it proves is one thing. For 6 years, the person actually keeping that house standing was me. I sat there a long time, staring at the columns, and a strange question started to take shape. A question I'd never once had a reason to ask. If I'd been paying the taxes, the actual property taxes, to the actual county, then who actually owned this house? I'd always assumed it was my father's. Everyone assumed that. He acted like a man who owned things, talked about the house like it was an extension of his own body, something he'd built with his hands. But I had never seen a single piece of paper that said so. I'd never had a reason to look. You don't audit your own family, not until the day they hand you a reason and call it a party. So I called the one person who might know. My grandmother's lawyer. His name was Mr. Halloran. He'd handled her affairs for 30 years. When I gave him my name, there was a pause on the line. Not an awkward one. A careful one. The pause of a man who'd been holding something for a long time and was relieved to finally set it down. Then he said something that made the hair stand up on my arms. She told me you might call one day. Do you still have the envelope? I said I did. I asked him what was inside it. That's for you to open, he said. And only under the conditions she set. I won't break her instructions. But I'll tell you this much, because she'd want you to know it now. Your grandmother didn't leave that house to chance. There's an instrument. And it was recorded. I didn't know the word the way he meant it. Not yet. I just knew it landed somewhere deep, like a key turning in a lock I couldn't see. Recorded where? I asked. Where these things are always recorded, he said. Don't open the envelope unless you have to. She was very specific about that. But understand me, if they ever come for that house, you will already have everything you need. She made sure of it years ago. He wouldn't say more. He didn't have to. He'd given me one word, and it had changed the whole shape of the room. Recorded. I sat with the phone in my hand after he hung up, and for the first time since the party, I let myself feel something other than cold. It wasn't quite hope. It was closer to the feeling you get when a number you've been chasing for hours finally appears in the right column, and the whole sheet goes quiet and balanced. My grandmother had known. Whatever was in that envelope, she'd built it for exactly the kind of day my father had just handed me. She'd seen him coming from years away, but I didn't open the envelope. I'd made a promise, and the conditions weren't met. Getting thrown out of a bedroom is not the same as someone coming for the house. Not yet. So I kept my word. I set the envelope on the table where I could see it, and I left it sealed. Then I kept building my file, because that's what I do when the world stops making sense. I make it make sense on paper. Names, dates, amounts. Things that don't change their story depending on who's in the room. And while I waited, the story started. Not my story. His. It came back to me through Maya again, screenshots from the family group, the one I still wasn't in. My father had moved on from the party to the cleanup, and the cleanup was me. Don't listen to her, he'd written. She's always been jealous of Daniel. There was more. That I was unstable. That I'd probably make up some story for attention. My aunt agreed with a row of nodding emojis. Daniel dropped in a laughing face. The whole thread, building me into someone you'd be a fool to believe. He was getting ahead of it. Smart. In a cruel way. If he painted me as the bitter, jealous, unstable daughter now, then anything true I ever said later would just sound like the bitter, jealous, unstable daughter talking. And it worked on me. For about an hour. That's the part I have to be honest about. I felt the old shame come crawling up the back of my neck, hot and familiar, the same shame I'd felt standing in that yard while they laughed. My throat got tight. My eyes started reading the worst lines over and over, the way you press on a bruise. The urge to call every single person in that thread and explain myself. To prove I wasn't crazy, to beg them, one by one, to please just believe me. To please remember who actually showed up when the furnace died. My thumb actually hovered over my aunt's name. I wanted to call her so badly my hand ached with it. Then I put the phone down, because I finally understood what explaining would get me. Nothing. You can't out-argue a story with feelings. You beat it with a file. So I didn't call anyone. I didn't defend myself. I didn't type a single word into that thread. Instead, I screenshotted every message. Every insult, every nodding emoji, every laughing face. I noted the date and time on each one. I dropped them all into a folder, the same way I'd drop receipts into a tax file, labeled and ordered and ready for the day someone finally asked to see proof. He thought silence meant I had nothing. He'd always thought that. They were building a story. So was I. The difference was, mine came with receipts. 4 days later, Maya didn't send me a screenshot. She sent me a link. No message with it, just the link, like she couldn't bring herself to type the words. I clicked it. It was a real estate listing. My grandmother's house. Our house. Up for sale. The photos hit me before the text did. They'd staged it. Someone had come in and set out throw pillows that weren't ours, angled the couch, opened the blinds to catch the light. The living room I grew up in, dressed up like a stranger's house. The kitchen I'd paid to retile 2 summers ago. The tile I'd picked out myself on a Saturday because the old one was cracked and nobody else cared enough to call a contractor. I knew the grout lines in those photos. I'd watched them dry. And across the top of the page, in that bright, confident font these listings always use, 3 words. For sale by owner. By owner. That was the funniest lie I'd ever read. I didn't laugh though. I felt the floor tilt a little under me, the way it does when an elevator drops. Because this wasn't a bedroom anymore. This wasn't a party I could walk out of. He was selling the whole house. Fast. Cash buyer fast. Before anyone thinks too hard fast. The kind of fast that only makes sense when somebody's afraid a deal might fall apart if anyone looks at it too closely. I called Maya. She picked up on the first ring, whispering like she was hiding in another room. I wasn't supposed to tell you, she said. Daniel's been bragging about it. The money's for the wedding, and to start some new business he's launching. Your dad said it's time the house finally did something useful. Finally did something useful. He'd said almost the exact same words about me at the party. Useful for a photo. Useful as a payday. In my father's world, a thing only earned the right to exist the moment it made him money, and the house had just been promoted to the same category I'd been demoted from. So that was the plan. Sell the house I'd kept alive for 6 years, hand the cash to the golden child for a wedding and a fantasy, and call it the house finally earning its keep. They were going to set fire to the one thing my grandmother loved and warm their hands on it. This was it. This was the thing she'd warned me about, word for word, the afternoon she folded my fingers over that envelope. If they ever come for the house. I'd spent years half hoping that day would never arrive, that she'd been overcautious, that her own son wasn't really the man she'd quietly planned around. She wasn't overcautious. They'd come. Not for a room. For all of it. But I still didn't open the envelope. Not yet. Because I'm an accountant, and you don't play a card before you know exactly what it's worth. I called Mr. Halloran instead. They listed it, I said. For sale by owner. There was a small sound on his end. Almost a laugh, but sadder than that. Then it's begun, he said. Listen to me carefully. Listing it isn't the dangerous part. He can put any picture he wants on the internet. The dangerous part is selling it. A sale has to close. And to close, you need clear title. You need to prove you own the thing you're selling. And the title on that house is not going to say what your father thinks it says. I asked him what would happen when the buyer's people checked. That depends on how fast everyone moves, he said. But understand the shape of it. This isn't a fight about feelings anymore. This is property and money. He is trying to sell a house that isn't his and collect money for it. The moment that collides with the actual title, it stops being a family argument and becomes a civil matter, a question of who owns what, and who took money they had no right to take. Those are very different rooms than the one you grew up arguing in. That was the first time it really landed for me. The party, the insults, the deadweight, none of that was the dangerous thing. The dangerous thing was a signature on a sale contract for a house that wasn't his. My father had spent his whole life winning arguments. He was about to lose to arithmetic. He told me there was already a closing date. The buyers were real, motivated, paying quickly. My father wanted it done before the wedding, which meant he wanted it done soon. How soon? I asked. 14 days, he said. 14 days. I wrote it on a sticky note and pressed it to the edge of my laptop. 14 days. And I only needed one document. I'd like to tell you I stayed calm and clinical through all of it. I didn't. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Not a single hour. I lay in the dark in my new apartment, in a bed that still smelled like the store, listening to pipes I didn't recognize and traffic that wasn't mine, doing the math on my own life, on whether I actually had the nerve to stand up in front of my entire family, in front of my father, and take everything I'd let them believe was theirs. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw 30 people laughing in a backyard. I heard my own voice saying, "Okay, Dad." I felt 9 years old again, and 9-year-olds don't take houses back from their fathers. By 4 in the morning, my hands were shaking. Actually shaking, the way they do after too much fear and no food. I got up and tried to make coffee and spilled the grounds across the counter because I couldn't hold the scoop steady. I stood there in the dark over a mess of spilled coffee and almost cried, not from sadness, exactly, from the sheer size of what I was about to do. And then I did what I always do with shaking hands. I gave them a job. I sat down at the kitchen table while it was still dark out, and I called Mr. Halloran's office the second it opened and booked a meeting before the closing date. Then I built. I pulled the listing and saved my own copy. I took a screenshot of the page with the date and the time stamped right there in the corner, for sale. By owner, because someday somebody official was going to want to see, in his own words, that he'd called himself the owner of a house he didn't own. The shaking stopped somewhere around the third file I labeled. Work does that for me. Always has. Here's the thing about my father. He had never in his life had to check his own facts, because no one had ever made him. He talked, and the world rearranged itself to agree. So when the sale started moving and the buyer's agent needed the seller's signature to lock it in, he didn't pause. He didn't wonder. He didn't pull a single document to make sure the house was actually his to sell. He just signed. I wasn't in the room for it. I heard the details later. From Maya. From the paperwork that eventually crossed my lawyer's desk. But I know exactly what it looked like, because I have watched that man sign things my whole life. The confident scrawl. The little flourish he does on the last letter, like the page should feel lucky to hold his name. A man who has never once been wrong. Sitting at a closing table, being asked to confirm he's the owner, not even slowing down to read the line above his own signature. Sign here where it says owner, the agent told him. And he did. He signed the sale agreement. He accepted the earnest money deposit, real money from real buyers. And on the line that said seller, on the line that said owner, he wrote his name in ink. He thought he was closing the deal of the year. He probably went home and poured himself something nice. He probably told Daniel the wedding was on. He didn't know he'd just done my work for me. Every threat I might ever have had to prove, he had just put into writing himself, in his own hand, of his own free will. He'd just signed his name to a lie in ink, dated, witnessed, and filed. The conditions were met. They had come for the house. So I sat down at my kitchen table, alone, under one lamp, and I opened my grandmother's envelope. I'd carried it for so long that the flap had gone soft and gray at the edges. It tore cleanly, with a small dry sound that seemed too loud in the quiet apartment. My hands weren't steady. I noticed that and didn't fight it. Some things you're allowed to shake for. Inside were 3 things. A letter in her handwriting, that careful slanted cursive they don't teach anymore. A thick stapled document. And a single index card, slipped on top, like she knew I'd need something simple to read first before my hands could manage the rest. She always did think 2 steps ahead of everyone in the room, including me. I read the card first. 5 words. If you're reading this, they tried. And under it, smaller. Now finish it. I had to set it down and breathe. Then I read the letter. It was short. She didn't waste words, even at the end. She wrote that she'd seen this coming. That she loved her son but had learned, the hard way, not to trust him with anything he could lose, because she'd already watched him almost lose everything once. She wrote that she'd watched me pay for that house quietly, for years, and never say a word about it, and that was how she'd known. Not from what I said, from what I did when no one was thanking me. There was one line I've read so many times since that I could recite it in my sleep. The one who pays is the one who cares. So I made sure the one who cares is the one who keeps it. She'd known. Not guessed, not worried. Known. She had sat in that house watching her own son and her own grandson, and done the cold arithmetic of who would protect the place and who would sell it out from under the family, and she'd quietly bet the house on me. My grandmother had seen this coming years before I ever did. I sat there with her handwriting in my hands and cried for a few minutes, and I'm not going to pretend I didn't. Not from grief, exactly. From being seen, after a lifetime of being the furniture, one person had watched me the whole time and written it down where it counted. Then I picked up the stapled document, and I made myself read it like an auditor instead of a granddaughter. Slow, line by line. And I had to read it twice, because the second time I understood what I was holding. It was a trust. And, attached to it, a deed. Let me put this in plain English, the way I had to translate it for myself at that table. A deed is the document that says who legally owns a piece of property. Whose name is on it, that's who owns the house. Simple as that. This deed had a name on it as the owner. The name was mine. Not my father's. Not Daniel's. Mine. I read it 3 times, the way I'd read the word deadweight 3 times 2 weeks before, except this time the floor didn't tilt. This time it held. For the first time in my life, the paper and the truth were on the same side, and they were both on mine. Years ago, while she was healthy and sharp and fully herself, my grandmother had quietly worked with Mr. Halloran. She'd put the house into a trust and transferred ownership to me. And then she'd told absolutely no one. She'd let my father go on believing the house was his, year after year, because she understood something about him that took me 29 years to learn. She knew that the day he reached for the house would come, and she wanted the truth already locked in place before it did. Recorded. Settled. Untouchable. I pulled my bank statements back out and laid them next to the deed. 6 years of payments in my name, sitting beside a deed in my name. They told one clean story with no gaps in it. The payer and the owner were the same person. Me? My father had been living, rent-free, inside his daughter's house, calling her deadweight, throwing her a going-away party in her own living room. But there was still one number I hadn't checked. A deed isn't just paper you keep in a drawer. To truly count, to be something no one can wave away, it has to be recorded, filed with the county, stamped, given a number and a date that become part of the public record forever. Mr. Halloran had said the word on the phone, days ago, recorded. I needed to see it with my own eyes, in the county system, not just in my grandmother's envelope. So the next morning I drove to the county recorder's office. I barely remember the drive. Fluorescent lights, a long counter, a tired clerk behind it, the smell of old paper and burnt coffee and floor wax. The least dramatic room in the world for what was about to happen in it. There was a man ahead of me renewing something, and I stood in line with a certified copy request form and a pen, my heart going like I was about to sit an exam. Then it was my turn. I gave her the parcel number. She typed it in, unhurried, the keys clicking. A few seconds passed that felt much longer. Then she turned her monitor toward me without a word, the way clerks do, like she had no idea she was turning my whole life around with it. There it was, the deed, in the public record, with two things I will never forget as long as I live: an instrument number and a recording date. I read the recording date, and the room went quiet around me, the way a room does when your whole body stops to listen. The hum of the lights, the clerk's keyboard, everything dropped away except those two lines on the screen. The date was years before the party, years before the listing, years before he ever sat at that closing table and signed his name as owner. While he was telling holiday tables that I'd never own a thing, the county had already had it on file, in black and white, that I owned the very house he was sitting in. Let me make this one as clear as I can, because this is the number everything turns on. The document is the recorded deed. The key detail is the instrument number and the recording date, a unique number, with a date attached, sitting in the county's public record where anyone on earth can look it up. And what it proves is the single thing my father can never argue away. I had legally owned that house for years. It was on file, in public, the entire time he was calling me deadweight. A number, with a date. The one thing in the world he couldn't talk his way around. I asked the clerk for a certified copy. She printed it, pressed the county seal into it with a heavy little click of the stamp, and slid it across the counter without any idea she'd just handed me the most important piece of paper of my life. The seal was still warm. I held it for a second like it might dissolve. I paid the small fee at the window. I have never in my life been so happy to pay a fee. I sat in my car in the recorder's parking lot for a while, the certified copy face up on the passenger seat where I could keep glancing at it, the way you keep checking that your passport is still in your bag. The fear that had kept me up all night was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't the fear of being small anymore. It was the careful, focused fear of someone holding something that could go off if she wasn't precise with it. Then I called Mr. Halloran from the parking lot. I have the certified copy, I said. Instrument number and recording date. It predates everything. Good, he said. Then here's where we are. I'll draft a formal notice of claim of ownership and send it to the buyers and their agent. The moment they receive it, that sale cannot close. You can't sell what you don't own, and now there's a recorded document and a lawyer saying so in writing. The deal freezes. I asked him when he should send it, and I surprised myself with the answer. Not yet, I said, because that same morning, my father had done something he thought was the final blow. He'd called a family meeting, at the house, Sunday afternoon, everyone invited. The stated purpose, passed down to me through Maya, was simple. I was to come and sign a paper agreeing I had no claim to anything, agreeing to stop spreading stories, agreeing to disappear quietly so the sale could close in peace. He wanted an audience for my surrender. He wanted the whole family in the room to watch the deadweight sign herself away, so that when the sale closed, no one would ever ask a single inconvenient question. For once, I wanted the audience too, because everything he'd done to me, he'd done in front of people. The party, the group chat, the laughing. If the truth was going to land, it was going to land in the same room, in front of the same faces. I told Mr. Halloran I'd want him there on Sunday, parked outside, waiting for one text from me before he came in. He understood immediately. He didn't ask me to explain. He'd been holding my grandmother's secret for years. He could hold it one more Sunday afternoon. My father thought he was calling me in to make me sign away a house. He didn't know he was calling me into a room where I already held the deed. Sunday. The house. My house, though only 2 people in that room knew it. They were all there when I walked in. My father at the head of the dining table, where he always sat. Daniel beside him, arms crossed. Ashley with her phone already in her hand. Aunts, uncles, a couple of cousins. Maya in the corner, looking like she might be sick. And in the center of the table, laid out like a place setting, a single sheet of paper and a pen, waiting for me. The house smelled the way it always had on a Sunday coffee, somebody's perfume, the faint sweetness of the kitchen. I'd grown up in that smell. It made the whole thing feel almost normal, which somehow made it worse. They'd set the scene for an execution and served it like a family lunch. My father didn't waste time. "Sit down," he said. "We're going to keep this simple. You sign this. You agree you've got no claim to anything. You stop telling people stories. And you let this family move on with our lives." He tapped the paper. "Sign it, or you're no daughter of mine." The room was quiet, everyone watching me, and I could feel the smear had done its work. Weeks of it, because of how they were looking at me. Not like family, like a problem being managed. The unstable one, the jealous one, the deadweight, finally being handled in front of an audience. I felt it then, the old fear, right on schedule. My hand actually trembled as I reached toward the table, and I hated that everyone could probably see it. My mouth went dry, 29 years of being the disappointment, and here was the whole family lined up to watch me fold one more time. For half a second I wanted to. God help me. I wanted to sign it just to make the staring stop, just to be allowed to leave. That's what a lifetime of being the smallest person in the room does to you. It makes surrender feel like relief. Then I thought of my grandmother's 5 words. They tried. Now finish it. But I didn't reach for the pen. I reached into my bag, and I took out one piece of paper, and I slid it across the table toward my father. "Before I sign anything," I said, "read the top line." He looked annoyed, like I was wasting his big moment. He picked it up the way you pick up junk mail, half glancing, already preparing whatever he was going to say next. And I watched his eyes start to move across it. I watched the exact instant they stopped moving. It was the recorded deed. The certified copy, county seal in the corner. My name on the line that says owner. The instrument number and the recording date printed right at the top. He stopped reading. The color went out of his face from the top down, the way water drains from a glass. His mouth opened, and nothing came out. I had never once in my life seen my father with nothing to say. Not once. He was a man made entirely of things to say, and for 3 full seconds he was empty. It felt like the longest 3 seconds of the decade. You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. "What is this?" he finally said. It wasn't really a question. His voice had a crack running through the middle of it. "It's the deed to this house," I said. My voice came out steadier than my hands. "Read it out loud. If you want, read whose name is on the line that says owner." He didn't read it out loud. He couldn't. I think that was the moment he understood, before anyone else in the room did, exactly how much trouble he was in. That was when the front door opened. Mr. Halloran walked in. Gray suit, briefcase, the unhurried calm of a man who has done this 100 times and was never once the one who should be nervous. Heads turned. Nobody had invited him. He'd been waiting in his car at the curb for my one-word text, and the moment it came, he'd walked up the path my grandmother used to sweep and let himself into the front hall. He stopped at the end of the table and set his briefcase down with a soft, deliberate click that somehow silenced the whole room. "Good afternoon," he said. "I'm the attorney who recorded that deed. I'll keep this brief." He looked around the table, and then at my father. "This house is legally owned, and has been for years, by your daughter. The ownership is recorded with the county. The sale agreement you signed last week, in which you represented yourself as the owner, you signed it for a property you do not own." He let that sit for one beat. Then he said the line I will remember for the rest of my life. "This is not a family matter anymore. The deed is recorded in her name." I watched the room change. It happened in stages, like a wave coming in, and I will be honest with you, after a lifetime on the other side of these faces, I felt every single stage of it land. First, the silence. Total, ringing silence. The kind you can hear your own pulse inside of. Then the murmurs. Low, around the edges of the table, one cousin leaning to another, the word deed passing mouth to mouth. Then Ashley's phone came up, but this time it wasn't pointed at me, grinning, filming the deadweight. It was pointed at him. Then my aunt, the same aunt who'd put her hand over her mouth and laughed at the party, slowly leaned back in her chair and away from my father, the way you pull your hand back from a stove you didn't know was hot. And then someone at the far end said the quiet part out loud. Wait, whose house did you just try to sell? Nobody answered. That was the answer. For the first time in my life, my father had nothing to say to a room. But he wasn't finished. Men like him never go down on the first hit. I watched him gather himself, watched the performer come back online behind his eyes, because a man who has talked his way out of everything his whole life does not stop talking just because the truth walked in. He shoved his chair back and stood so fast it scraped the floor, and he found the only card he had left. He pointed at the paper in his hand, and his voice came back, too loud now, brittle at the edges, aimed at everyone in the room but me. This is forged, he said. She forged this. My mother would never have cut me out. She was confused at the end. She didn't know what she was signing. This girl tricked a sick old woman into signing her house away. He looked at his sisters. He looked for one ally, one nod, one person to say yes. That sounds like her. That must be it. He had one lie left, and he didn't know it yet, but the date was already waiting to kill it. Mr. Halloran didn't raise his voice. He never did, the whole time. That was the most frightening thing about him, if you were on the wrong side of it. That's a serious accusation, he said. Let's look at the date. He opened the briefcase. He laid a second document on the table beside the first, turning both so the room could see. This deed was signed and recorded years before your mother's final illness, he said. He put one finger on a line. Here is the recording date. And here is the notarization. A notary watched her sign it, confirmed who she was, and stamped it. At the time she did this, your mother was, by every account, including her own physician's records, completely sound of mind. There was no confusion. There was no deathbed. This was done years in advance, deliberately, by a woman who appears to have known exactly what she was protecting this house against. The recording date, that plain little number with a date attached. It didn't just answer his lie, it erased it. There's no arguing with a date. You can argue with a memory, with a feeling, with a grieving family's guilt. You cannot argue with a notary's stamp and a recording date that sits in a public office and has sat there, untouched, for years. He couldn't say she was confused at the end, because she had done this years before the end, in full health, in public, on the record, where no story he invented could ever reach it. I watched his last lie die on his face, the mouth still moving for a second after the sound stopped, like a man who reaches for one more stare in the dark and finds the floor. The room understood it at the same moment I watched him understand it was over. The sale didn't just fall through, it fell on him. And then the consequences started landing, one after another, exactly the way I'd quietly known they would the second I saw that recording date on the clerk's screen. The first one was immediate. The buyers are being notified today that the seller does not hold title, Mr. Halloran said. That sale is dead. It cannot close. And there is a separate problem for your father, which is not your daughter's to solve. He signed a contract representing himself as the owner and accepted a deposit on that basis. The buyers and their agent are very likely to call that misrepresentation, and they will want their money back, with their lawyer involved. Nobody at that table missed what that meant. He hadn't just lost a house that was never his. He'd taken real money, from real people, for a thing he didn't own. That was no longer a story he could spin at a barbecue, no longer a matter of who felt disrespected at dinner. That was a civil problem with his name signed to it, in ink, dated, witnessed. The kind of problem that comes with letters from lawyers and demands for repayment. The kind that doesn't care how loud you are at the head of the table. The second consequence happened right there in the room, and it was the one I never expected to move me the way it did. For my entire life, the family had arranged itself around my father like iron filings around a magnet. His version of things was the only version. If he said I was jealous, I was jealous. If he said I was unstable, people nodded. I had stopped expecting any of them to ever see me differently. My aunt stood up. She looked at my father, not at me. "You told us she was lying," she said quietly. "You stood in your backyard and told all of us she was unstable." Maya's voice came next, louder, shaking. "You let us laugh at her." One by one, the people who had laughed at the party stopped looking at me like the problem in the room. They turned, slowly, in their chairs, and looked at him. I didn't say a word to make them do it. I didn't have to. The deed had said it for me, and the date had said it louder. And Daniel, Golden Daniel, the future, the one the wedding money was for Daniel, said nothing at all. No charm, no big idea. He just stared at the table with the look of a man doing math he didn't like. Because in the space of about 4 minutes, the wedding money was gone, the launch money was gone, the down payment on the whole life he'd been promised was gone, and he was sitting in a house that had never, for one single day of his life, belonged to his father. The golden child had been spending an inheritance that didn't exist. The third consequence was the biggest, and it was the quietest. My father had no house to sell, because it wasn't his. And he had no house to live in either except by the permission of the daughter he had thrown a party to get rid of. The man who 2 weeks ago had raised a glass to celebrate getting the deadweight out of his house was now sitting in a house with my name on the deed, in front of every single person he had ever performed for. He had built his whole life on being the one who decided. And now the only person in the room who got to decide anything about that house was the daughter he'd thrown away. I stood up. I reached into my bag one last time. And I took out the envelope, my grandmother's envelope, the soft, worn paper, her handwriting still facing up. "Only open this if they ever come for the house." They'd come. And now it was done. I set it down on the table next to the deed, right in the middle where everyone could see it, where it had started its life as her secret and would end it as my proof. I laid it down flat with a small, final click of paper on wood, the last sound that envelope would ever need to make, and I slid the whole stack toward Mr. Halloran, like a hand of cards I no longer needed to hold. "You can stay," I said to my father, "if the owner says so." 2 weeks ago, he toasted to my exit. Now he was the one who needed permission to stay in the room. And then it happened. The thing this whole story had been driving toward. The thing I never, in 29 years, thought I would live to see. My father's voice broke. The voice that had decided who was a success and who was a disappointment. The voice that hung up first, every time. It cracked straight down the middle. His eyes were wet. His hands, the hands that had always been so sure when they signed his name, were open now, almost reaching toward me across the table. "Please," he said. "Please, don't take the house from your family. Don't put us out. Where would we go? Where would we go?" He asked me the exact question I had asked him on the phone 2 weeks before. The one he'd answered, without a second of thought, with "That's not my problem." I didn't gloat. "I need you to know that, because it matters to me, and because for a second the temptation was enormous." Every cruel thing he'd ever said was right there in my mouth, ready, sharpened by years. I could have handed it all back to him in front of everyone. I didn't scream. I didn't list his sins back to him. I didn't make a speech, and God knows I'd earned one. I just looked at him for a long moment, this smaller, grayer version of the man who had loomed over my entire life, and I felt the anger go quiet, because winning had turned out to be quieter than I expected. "I'm not going to throw anyone into the street today," I said. "I'm not you." He finally said please. It took losing everything he thought was his to teach him the word. A few weeks later, it was all in writing. I didn't put them on the street. My grandmother wouldn't have wanted that, and honestly, neither did I. Throwing people out of a house to prove a point, that was his move. It was never going to be mine. But I didn't hand the house back, either. That house was hers, and then it was mine, paid for with my money and protected by her foresight. It was going to stay that way. So I had Mr. Halloran draw up a lease, a real one. If my father and Daniel wanted to keep living in the house, they could as tenants. Rent due on the 1st of the month. My name on the deed, their names on the lease. The man who had spent my whole life telling me I would never own a single thing now mailed his rent, on the 1st of every month, to the person who owned the roof over his head. I never had to say a word about it. The envelope said it for me, every 30 days. I didn't move back in. I didn't want to. People assume the revenge fantasy ends with you reclaiming your throne in the big house. Mine didn't. I had my own apartment now, my own quiet, my own life that I'd been building the entire time they were laughing at me. The house had never really been the prize. The prize was never having to ask anyone's permission to exist again. I drove out to the house one last time to drop off the signed paperwork. My father met me at the door. He looked smaller than I remembered, like the last few weeks had let some of the air out of him. The performance was gone. He just looked tired and old. "Why are you doing it this way?" he asked. He still didn't fully understand it. "I'm not sure he ever will." "Because the house needs someone who'll take care of it," I said. "I've been doing that for 6 years. The only thing that's changed is now everyone knows." He started to say something about family, about how this wasn't how family was supposed to treat each other, which was a remarkable thing to hear from him, of all people, on that doorstep, of all places. I let him finish. I'd learned, finally, that I didn't have to fill his silences or argue with his version of things. I could just let the words sit there in the cold air between us and be as empty as they were. Then I told him the one true thing I'd carried for 6 years. "I'm not throwing you out," I said. "I'm just done paying for the man who threw me out." I handed him the lease. I got back in my car. And I drove home, not the house. Home. The small apartment with the pipes I now recognized. The bed that no longer smelled like the store. He'd thrown a party to celebrate getting rid of me. He'd called me deadweight in front of everyone we knew. He'd told me, my entire life, that I would never own a single thing in this world. And in the end, standing in the doorway of the home he had always believed was his, holding a lease with my name printed across the top, the loud man who had decided everyone's worth his whole life finally learned the only lesson that ever really mattered. You can't evict the landlord.